There comes a time in everyone's life when they're forced to confront a hard truth, not just about the world, but about themselves. You may spend years believing that if you're kind, if you work hard, if you're agreeable and selfless, and show up for others, respect will follow. That people will see your effort and treat you with the dignity you deserve. That the world rewards the ones who give everything without question. But one day you wake up and realize that's not how it works. People don't always respect kindness. They respect strength. And not the kind of strength that dominates a room or demands attention, but the quiet, rooted kind that starts with how you show up for yourself. I used to believe that being the nice one would eventually be enough. That if I said yes more often, if I bent just a little more, if I stayed quiet when I had something to say, people would appreciate me more. They didn't. What actually happened is they started to look past me, to take me for granted, to assume I'd always be there, always say yes, always accept less than I deserved. And I couldn't blame them, not entirely. I had trained them to see me that way. Every excuse I made, every boundary I failed to hold, every time I prioritized their comfort over my own value, I was teaching them that I didn't expect more. It wasn't until I stopped trying to be understood and started demanding more from myself that everything changed. I cut the habits that made me small, the ones that chipped away at my confidence and turned me into someone I barely recognized. And slowly the world around me responded. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in quiet, powerful ways. People listened more, trusted me more, valued my presence without me having to prove it. But it only happened after I let go of the behaviors that had kept me stuck. The first one I had to face was making excuses. It's a habit so many of us carry, often without realizing it. We think it's harmless, a little late because of traffic, a missed deadline because of an email that never came through, a broken promise because something came up. But here's what I learned the hard way. Every excuse chips away at your credibility. Every excuse tells the people around you that you're not in control, that when things get hard, you'll deflect instead of own it. And respect can't live in that space. It dies there. There was a period in my life when excuses rolled off my tongue like second nature. I was always justifying, always explaining, always trying to make people understand that it wasn't really my fault. But the truth is, people don't want reasons. They want reliability. They want to know you'll do what you say you'll do, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. And once I realized that, once I stopped explaining and started taking responsibility, something shifted. People stopped questioning me. They started trusting me, and I started trusting myself, because that's what responsibility really gives you. Not just respect from others, but respect from yourself. Every time I owned a mistake, every time I stopped the impulse to explain away my failures and instead just said, I got it wrong, and I'll fix it, I grew. I felt it in my bones. And the people around me, they could feel it too. But it doesn't stop there. Excuses are just the start. The next habit I had to cut was laziness. And that one was even harder to admit. Because laziness doesn't always look like lying on the couch doing nothing. Sometimes it looks like avoidance, like choosing the easier task instead of the important one, like coasting on natural talent instead of pushing yourself to grow, like knowing what you need to do and telling yourself, I'll get to it later. I was good at just enough to get by, smart enough to cover my tracks, but deep down, I knew I wasn't giving my best. And worse, I knew people could tell. That's the thing about effort. It's visible. You can't fake it for long. And when people see that you're not willing to push yourself, that you're comfortable doing the bare minimum, they don't respect you, even if they like you. Even if they smile and say it's fine. Deep down they know, and you know. And every time you choose ease over excellence, you reinforce the belief that you don't believe in yourself, that you don't think your goals are worth the effort, that your potential is something you're willing to waste. I had to look myself in the mirror and ask, am I really doing my best? And for a long time, the answer was no. So I changed it, not overnight, not with grand gestures, but with small, deliberate choices. I started showing up early, saying yes to the hard stuff, doing a little more than what was asked, and not because someone was watching, but because I was. And the more I followed through, the more I believed in myself. And as I believed in myself more, others started believing in me too. And then there was how I presented myself. It's a topic people avoid because it feels shallow, but it's not. How you show up in the world physically is a reflection of how you feel about yourself internally. If you roll out of bed and show up wrinkled, unkempt, like you couldn't be bothered, that energy comes with you. It walks into the room before you do, and people pick up on it. I used to say, they should like me for who I am, and they should. But the truth is, people respect what you respect. And if you don't respect yourself enough to show up with care, why should anyone else? It wasn't about vanity, it was about self-respect. When I started taking care of myself, when I paid attention to my grooming, my posture, my presence, I felt different, more grounded, more aware, and people treated me differently. Not because I was suddenly better looking or more fashionable, but because I looked like someone who gave a damn about myself, about my time, about how I showed up. And that spoke louder than words. These shifts, no more excuses, no more laziness, no more neglect, created a foundation. But the real transformation came when I started respecting other people's boundaries. That was a lesson I didn't see coming. I used to think being involved meant being close, that checking in constantly, offering advice, being in the mix meant I cared. But what I didn't realize was that I was crossing lines. I wasn't giving people the space they needed to breathe, to process, to be their own person, and eventually they started pulling away. Not because I was a bad person, but because I didn't understand the power of space. Respecting someone's boundary is one of the purest forms of respect you can offer. It says, I see you, I trust you, I don't need to control your process to stay connected. And when you offer that kind of trust, people feel safe. They come back on their own. They open up on their own terms. And they respect you more because of it. Each of these lessons hurt. They required me to admit things I didn't want to admit, to face parts of myself I had ignored for too long. But that's how real change happens. Not with affirmations or motivational speeches, but with deep honesty, with asking yourself, who am I when no one's watching? And then choosing to become someone you're proud of. Not because of what you have, not because of what you've achieved, but because of how you carry yourself. Every day, in every space, with every choice. That's what earns respect. Not perfection, not people-pleasing, not power, but quiet integrity, unshakable discipline, and deep, unwavering self-respect. There's a strange kind of transformation that happens when you stop chasing attention and start seeking alignment. You feel it not all at once, but in waves. One morning you wake up and realize you're not as desperate to be seen by people who don't really look. You stop dressing for reactions. You stop talking just to fill the air. You stop posting for applause. You feel this quiet shift inside you, almost like your soul finally exhaled. Because for the first time in a long time, you're not trying to prove anything. You're not performing anymore. You're just here, fully, finally. That change doesn't get a standing ovation. Most people won't even notice it, but you do. You feel it in your bones. You start spending time with yourself differently. You sit in silence, not because you're lonely, but because it feels safe now. You don't reach for your phone the second you feel discomfort. You breathe through it. You ask it questions, and slowly you realize your own company isn't as empty as you once believed. It's rich, layered, full of stories you've never had time to hear. And you start listening. The more you listen to yourself, the more you start hearing others differently too. Not just their words, but their energy. You pick up on the small shifts, the way someone's eyes glaze when they lie, the way their tone changes when they want something, the way their compliments feel heavy, like they're asking for something underneath. And the more aware you become, the less you react. You don't chase, don't argue, don't try to correct the record. You just see, you observe. And in that space of stillness, you realize how much power there is in restraint. Power, real power, doesn't look like control. It looks like self-mastery. It's the ability to know what you could say, but choose not to. To know how to strike, but choose peace. To know how to run, but stay present. That kind of power changes how people experience you. They start to notice the weight behind your words, the steadiness in your presence. You no longer need to demand respect. Your energy commands it before you even speak. But the journey there isn't glamorous. It's gritty. It's quiet. It requires you to cut through years of noise, to untangle yourself from patterns you never questioned. One of those patterns? People-pleasing. That addiction to harmony even when it means you're in hell. That compulsion to be liked, to avoid conflict, to say yes when every cell in your body is screaming no. It's not kindness, it's fear in disguise, and it wears you down. You give and give, hoping it will come back full circle. But more often than not, you're left empty, holding the weight of everyone else's expectations, and wondering why no one ever asks what you need. I lived in that pattern for too long. I wore it like a second skin. The agreeable one, the helpful one, the one who never caused waves, and on the surface I was loved. Or so I thought. But the love I received was conditional. It was tied to my usefulness, my compliance, my silence. The moment I spoke up, the moment I said, I'm tired, I can't, I won't, the smiles changed, the tone shifted, and I saw the truth. I was loved for who I was to them, not who I was within myself. That truth cut deep, but it also set me free. Because once you realize that approval comes with strings, you start cutting them, one by one. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to win over the ones who only clap when you're performing. You stop shrinking to keep the peace. And that doesn't make you mean, it makes you real. Realness is rare. It scares people who are used to masks, but it also draws in those who crave truth. And that's when everything changes. When you start showing up as your full self, unfiltered, unpolished, honest, you start attracting people who see you, not a version of you they've created in their head. You attract connections that are based on resonance, not performance. And those connections, they're deeper, stronger. They require less effort because they're built on truth. It took me years to realize how much energy I was wasting trying to be liked. And for what? Temporary validation, a few extra followers, an invite to a room where I'd have to pretend to belong? Not anymore. I'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by people who only love my mask. I'd rather walk away from a crowded room than sit there feeling invisible in plain sight. Because real belonging doesn't ask you to edit yourself. It welcomes your edges, your silence, your softness, your fire. There's also a point in this journey when you stop seeing boundaries as walls and start seeing them as bridges. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about protecting what's sacred within you. They say, this is where I end and you begin. They say, I love you, but I won't lose myself to keep you. And when you start setting them, some people won't understand. They'll say you've changed. They'll accuse you of being cold. But that's just their comfort talking. That's their access being revoked. And you're allowed to revoke access to people who only show up for the parts of you that serve them. You'll also start noticing that the people who respect your boundaries are the ones who've done the work themselves. They don't flinch when you say no. They don't guilt you for needing space. They don't expect you to abandon yourself to prove your loyalty. They meet you where you are. They communicate, they adjust. They love you in ways that feel like freedom, not obligation. And that, more than anything, becomes your compass. Does this feel free? Do I feel safe? Do I feel like I can breathe? If the answer is no, you don't stay. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but out of deep, unwavering self-respect. Because staying in places that choke your spirit is not loyalty, it's self-betrayal. You'll still stumble, of course. Old habits die slow. There will be moments when you backslide, when you say yes too fast, when you apologize for something that wasn't your fault, when you try to keep the peace even though it's breaking you. But even in those moments, you're different now. You catch it quicker, you realign faster, you forgive yourself with more grace, and that too is growth. This journey isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about becoming a truer one. The version that doesn't dilute your soul to be accepted. The version that doesn't hustle for your worth. The version that walks into every room rooted, clear, and sovereign. The one who doesn't need noise to feel seen. The one who has learned to sit in silence and say, "This is enough. I am enough." And the more you live from that space, the more you realize that you never needed to be liked by everyone. You just needed to be loved by yourself. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from the outside. It lives within you. It settles in when you stop chasing things that never belonged to you in the first place. When you stop begging for attention from people who only look when they need something. When you stop explaining yourself to people who are already committed to misunderstanding you. It's not bitter. It's not even lonely. It's just peaceful. Like you've stepped out of a storm you didn't even realize you'd been standing in for years. And when you finally hear that silence, really hear it, you realize how loud your life used to be and how little of it actually belonged to you. You think back to all the times you said yes when you wanted to scream no. All the times you laughed at jokes that cut too deep. All the moments you allowed people to write your story with hands that didn't know your history. And slowly, you start taking it back. One page at a time, one boundary at a time, one honest sentence at a time. Because this is yours, your life, your voice, your energy, and you finally see how sacred that is. You begin to live differently. You're no longer the person who feels obligated to reply to every message the second it comes in. You don't feel guilty for not being on all the time. You don't need to fill every silence with noise or every relationship with constant updates. You understand now that peace isn't found in proving your worth. It's found in being aligned with it. And that alignment doesn't require permission. It just requires presence. Presence changes everything. You walk into a room differently when you're not looking for approval. You speak with a different tone when you're not worried about being liked. You listen more deeply when you're not planning your next move. And people feel that. They don't always know how to name it, but they notice. The calm, the confidence, the way your energy doesn't shift based on who's around, the way you don't shrink, the way you don't chase. That's presence. And it's rare. You start holding yourself to a higher standard, not for validation, but out of love. You don't gossip just to be included in the conversation. You don't entertain drama just because you're bored. You don't let other people's insecurities shape your confidence. You no longer speak to fill space. You speak to offer something real. And if you have nothing to say, you remain silent. Because silence isn't emptiness. It's where truth gathers its strength. Your truth starts to matter more than your image. You don't perform anymore. You don't twist your personality to make other people comfortable. You don't betray yourself for applause. You let go of the need to be the funny one, the smart one, the agreeable one. You just are, fully. And in that fullness, you begin to attract people who see you, not just the version of you that plays nice, but the one who's honest, flawed, healing, real. You also start noticing how much of your past you survive simply by pretending. Pretending you were fine, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending you didn't need more, and you carry so much guilt for the times you didn't speak up. But now you understand, silence was survival. People don't realize how many versions of yourself you had to bury just to be safe. But now you're done surviving. Now you're choosing to live, and living requires truth, even when it's messy, even when it costs you connection, even when your voice shakes. Because your voice is sacred. It doesn't need to be loud to be heard. It just needs to be yours. You stop mimicking the way others speak. You stop using language that doesn't feel like home. You stop repeating ideas you don't believe in, and you start speaking from the deepest part of yourself, the part that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. And every time you speak from that place, you get a little closer to freedom. Freedom looks different now. It's not about having no responsibilities. It's about being responsible to the right things. Your peace, your integrity, your values. You no longer let people pull you in every direction just because they have access to you. You protect your time like it's sacred, because it is. You stop showing up just to prove you're dependable. You show up because it matters, because it aligns, because it feels honest. You begin to love yourself in a way that isn't conditional. It's not tied to productivity. It's not wrapped around your appearance. It doesn't disappear when you make a mistake. It's steady, forgiving, grounded. You stop speaking to yourself like a critic and start speaking like a guide. You don't tear yourself down for feeling tired. You ask what your body needs. You don't shame yourself for not being further ahead. You remind yourself of how far you've already come, and that love, that self-respect becomes your foundation. It changes the way you react when someone disrespects you. You don't explode, you don't beg, you just exit quietly, confidently, because now you know you don't owe anyone your energy just because they want it. Access is earned, not demanded, and your boundaries are not negotiable. You stop internalizing people's behavior. You realize that when someone is short with you, dismissive, cold, it's not always about you. Most of the time, it's about them, their day, their mood, their pain. And while you can hold compassion for that, you don't carry it. You don't make it yours. Because you're no longer in the business of interpreting everyone else's silence as a statement about your worth. You know who you are, and you don't need their validation to confirm it. You also forgive differently. You don't rush to forgive just to keep the peace. You forgive because you're ready to release the burden. Not because someone demanded it, and sometimes you forgive people in silence. Not for them to hear, not for them to feel better, but for your own heart to finally rest. You realize that forgiveness isn't always reconciliation. Sometimes it's letting go without looking back. Sometimes it's moving forward with no need for closure. And when you move like that, with quiet power, with intention, with love rooted in truth, life shifts. Opportunities find you. The right people come closer. The wrong ones fall away without effort. And you're not surprised anymore because you've been doing the inner work. You've been clearing space. And what shows up in your life now is a reflection of what you believe you deserve. That belief doesn't come from ego. It comes from knowing your worth, knowing your value, knowing that you don't need to prove yourself to anyone who can't already see the weight of your presence. And that kind of knowing, it becomes unshakable. You look back on the person you used to be, the one who over-explained, over-apologized, over-gave, and you don't judge them, you honor them, because that version of you was doing their best with what they had. They were surviving, and they got you here, so you thank them. You say, "You kept me alive, but I'll take it from here." And then you walk into your life like it belongs to you, because it does. There's something that happens when you stop needing to be chosen. You begin to understand the difference between someone wanting you and someone valuing you. There was a time when the sound of your phone lighting up from the right person would shift your entire mood. A simple reply, a little attention, and suddenly you felt seen. You'd wait on it, crave it, even measure your own worth by how often it happened. And it worked for a while, until you realized how exhausted you were. Because chasing validation is a full-time job, and the paycheck is always delayed. It's in that exhaustion that you wake up. You realize that being picked, being wanted, being called back, it doesn't mean what you thought it did. Because people can want you for the most superficial reasons, for how you make them feel, for how easy you are to talk to, for the way you always listen, always give, always understand. But none of that means they see you. None of that means they're willing to meet you where you are. And suddenly you're not flattered anymore. You're just tired. That's when the shift happens. You stop asking if they like you. You start asking if you like yourself when you're around them. You start paying attention to how your body feels after the conversation. If you leave feeling seen or if you feel smaller. If their words build you or confuse you. If their energy calms your soul or spins it into chaos. You become more curious about your own peace than their approval. And when that happens, things start to fall away. People who once lit up your screen start fading from your heart. Not because you're bitter, but because you're clear. The conversations that used to leave you craving more now leave you feeling hollow. The way they almost cared, almost showed up, almost chose you, it doesn't excite you anymore. It unsettles you, because almost was never going to be enough. You begin to understand that the ones who are meant for you won't need to be convinced. They won't make you second-guess your own gut. They won't breadcrumb you with just enough love to keep you hanging on. They will arrive fully, not perfectly, but honestly. And until they do, you learn to stay full on your own. That fullness comes from the little things, waking up and keeping promises to yourself. Drinking water, not because someone told you to, but because you care about your body now. Going for a walk without your phone, just to listen to your own thoughts. Journaling the things you're afraid to say out loud. Cooking a meal for yourself like someone who matters is coming over, except this time, it's you. You start creating a life that feels like a soft landing, not one that needs to be documented or praised, just one that feels like home inside your own skin. You light a candle and sit in the quiet. You rearrange your space so it reflects who you're becoming. You delete the numbers you always text when you're lonely. You stop keeping one foot in the past just in case the door opens again. Because you're done waiting at closed doors. You're done knocking on hearts that won't open. That kind of clarity is lonely at first, but it doesn't stay that way. Because in the quiet, something else shows up. Self-trust. You begin to believe yourself again. You ask, do I want this? And you actually listen to the answer. You don't gaslight yourself anymore. You don't say, maybe I'm just being sensitive, when your soul is shouting for peace. You hear your own discomfort, and instead of pushing it down, you say, okay, I hear you. And then you act accordingly. That kind of trust changes how you move. You walk into rooms without needing to be the favorite. You let go of the urge to be understood by people who refuse to listen. You stop explaining your choices to people who never earned the right to question them. You don't fight for space, you create it. You don't chase closure, you become it. And yes, there are still days when you miss the chaos, because the chaos was familiar. It was a distraction. It gave you something to fix, something to obsess over, something to chase. But healing teaches you to sit in the stillness, to not need the noise to feel alive, to not need the drama to feel desired. And the more you sit in that stillness, the more you realize how much of your energy you've spent trying to earn what should have been offered freely. Love, real love, doesn't need to be earned through suffering. You don't need to prove you're good enough to be loved well. You don't need to audition for basic decency. You don't need to tolerate confusion just to avoid being alone. You deserve a love that doesn't make you question your value, that doesn't punish you with silence, that doesn't disappear and come back like you're an option on a shelf. You deserve consistency, not intensity that burns out, not passion that fades when it's no longer convenient, but a love that stays, that shows up, that doesn't require you to shrink. But until that love finds you, you become it for yourself. You start doing the things for you that you once hoped someone else would do. You show up for yourself on hard days. You speak kindly to yourself when you mess up. You give yourself rest when you're tired instead of shaming yourself for needing it. You buy yourself flowers not for the photo, but for the feeling. And you stop waiting to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. And when people ask what changed, you won't always have the words. Because the change didn't come from a book, or a quote, or a sudden moment of clarity. It came from all the little moments when you could have betrayed yourself and didn't, when you could have stayed silent and spoke, when you could have said yes and finally said no. It came from choosing you over and over, even when it felt unfamiliar, even when it felt scary, even when you were the only one clapping. You'll still feel the ache sometimes, that longing, that tenderness for what never fully was. But it won't break you like it used to, because now when you miss someone, you don't rush to fix it. You sit with the ache. You feel it fully. And then you remind yourself that missing someone isn't a reason to go back to being someone you're not. That loving someone doesn't require you to abandon yourself. That you can hold both, grief and growth, love and letting go. And when someone finally shows up who sees you, truly sees you, it won't be because you chased them. It'll be because you became someone worth standing next to. Someone who didn't settle, someone who didn't compromise their voice, someone who didn't twist themselves into a smaller shape just to fit into someone else's world. You'll stand tall, you'll be soft and sure, and they'll meet you there, fully. Because that's what happens when you stop needing to be chosen. You start choosing everything that chooses you back. There's a specific kind of clarity that doesn't come from thinking, but from finally getting tired enough. Not the kind of tired that a nap can fix, but the kind that settles deep into your soul. The kind that shows up after you've repeated the same patterns too many times, apologized for things that weren't your fault, fought for people who never fought for you, waited on someone to realize your worth, only to find out they never truly saw you in the first place. That kind of tired doesn't make you bitter. It makes you honest, brutally honest. With others, sure, but mostly with yourself. You stop pretending that maybe means yes. You stop turning red flags into potential. You stop rewriting the same story hoping for a different ending. Because now you know you can't heal in the same environment that hurt you. And you definitely can't become your fullest self while living in someone else's version of you. That realization is jarring. It hits you quietly. You're folding laundry or making coffee or driving home when it suddenly lands. The person you've been trying to win over never really knew how to love you. Not because you're unlovable, but because they were never meant to. That moment doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like grief. Because you remember all the times you ignored your own needs just to keep them close. The way you softened your voice, held back your truth, learned to read their moods before they even said a word. You shaped yourself around their comfort. You stayed when you were tired. You listened when they never asked how you were doing. And somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that if you just gave a little more, they'd finally see you. But they didn't. And now you see yourself fully, without them. That's where the transformation begins. In that silent acknowledgement, when you stop performing and start rebuilding. Not as revenge, not as a response, but because you deserve a life that feels good inside, not just one that looks good from the outside. You start collecting yourself piece by piece. You breathe deeper, you speak slower, You stop offering explanations to people who aren't listening. You let people be confused about your decisions. You stop trying to manage everyone else's reactions. Because now you understand. It's not your job to be understood by everyone. It's your job to be true to yourself. And that kind of truth, it's revolutionary because it redefines everything. You no longer measure your worth by how needed you are. You don't chase connection to feel whole. You realize that just because someone wants you, it doesn't mean they're capable of loving you. Just because someone says they miss you doesn't mean they're healthy for you. Just because someone gave you attention doesn't mean they deserve access. You stop making people permanent who only saw you as temporary. You stop calling someone a friend just because you have history. You stop staying out of loyalty when it's costing your peace. That shift doesn't come with applause. No one throws you a party for choosing yourself. But internally, something sacred opens up, a door back to yourself. A version of you who doesn't tolerate chaos in the name of love. A version of you who doesn't accept confusion as the price for companionship. A version of you who knows how to walk away, not because they don't care, but because they finally do. You start living differently. You don't text out of boredom. You don't reply out of guilt. You don't show up just to keep the peace. You ask, is this mine to carry? And if it's not, you set it down. You stop rescuing people from their own patterns. You stop trying to be the reason someone changes. You let people be exactly who they are, and you act accordingly. You don't take their potential as a promise. You don't take their apologies as currency. You watch what they do. You feel how your body responds, and then you choose, quietly, firmly, with love. And when you love yourself like that, you stop needing to be filled by anyone else. You become the one who pours into yourself first. You create little rituals, not to fix yourself, but to come back home. You go for walks without rushing. You read without posting it. You cook meals that feel nourishing. You unplug, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because the silence feels sacred now. You light candles just because. You clean your space like it's an extension of your soul. And it is. You no longer crave noise. You crave clarity. You crave people who make you feel calm, not high. You crave honesty even when it's hard. You want deep. You want real. You want conversations where no one's trying to one-up each other, where you're not playing roles, just showing up. Fully, messily, authentically. And yes, it narrows your circle. That kind of realness isn't for everyone. Some people miss the version of you who smiled through everything. The one who always answered, always gave, always softened your edges to make them comfortable. But you're not that person anymore. You're not angry. You're just not available for anything that asks you to betray yourself. You become more comfortable with silence, with pauses, with not knowing what comes next. You realize that growth doesn't always come with big breakthroughs. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to go to bed early, to drink water instead of pouring another drink, to let the phone ring, to not text back, to not explain, to say I'm tired and rest without guilt, to say no and not justify. That kind of growth isn't glamorous, but it's real. You start noticing how good your own energy feels when you're not giving it away all the time. You have more space to create, to dream, to move at your own pace. You realize how much of your life you spent reacting to everyone else, how little of your schedule was actually yours. And you take it back, hour by hour, choice by choice. You claim it. You also start to grieve, not just the people you let go of, but the version of you that existed in those relationships. The one who tried so hard, the one who didn't know any better, the one who thought love meant staying, even when it hurt. You hold that version of you with grace. You whisper, you did your best. But I've got us now. And you move forward, and one day, without even realizing it, You wake up and feel light. Not because everything's perfect, but because you're no longer carrying what doesn't belong to you, because you've stopped begging life to be something it's not, because you've made peace with the past, with the people who left, with the parts of you that had to break so you could rebuild. And you feel something you haven't felt in a long time, free. Truly free. It hits you in the small moments. When you're doing the dishes or walking home or lying awake at night, the realization that you're not the same person anymore. Not in some grand, obvious way, but in the kind of way you feel in your breath. In the kind of calm that doesn't demand attention. You're more grounded now. You react slower. You don't rush to fill silences. Don't race to fix every misunderstanding. Don't chase people who drift. You've grown quieter, not out of defeat, but out of strength. The version of you that used to over-explain is gone. You used to think that clarity meant giving people the full script of your heart, that if they just understood, they wouldn't leave, or hurt you, or misjudge your intentions. But now you understand that people will interpret you through their own lens, no matter how clearly you speak. And you've stopped trying to manage that. You've stopped trying to hold up your truth for inspection like it needs approval. You just live it. And those who get it, get it. The rest, they were never meant to. You realize that clarity isn't loud. It's not performance. It's not a long caption or a defensive conversation. Clarity is in how you carry yourself. It's in the way you don't flinch when someone doesn't text back, the way you don't spiral when plans change, the way you don't beg for someone to stay when your gut is already telling you it's time to go. That's clarity, that's confidence, and that's what happens when you finally start trusting yourself more than you trust their validation. You start showing up differently in relationships, not harder, not colder, just more centered. You don't argue to be right. You don't chase closure. You don't try to heal people as a way to prove your own worth. You simply ask, is this connection feeding my peace or draining it? Is it reciprocal, or am I the only one showing up fully? You pay attention, not to the words, but to the patterns, not to the promises, but to the consistency. You stop being impressed by intensity and start being drawn to stability. You know now that love that burns too fast often fizzles out just as quick. And you don't want fire anymore. You want warmth. You want presence. You want to sit next to someone and feel your nervous system relax, not brace. You want love that feels like exhale, not adrenaline. And most importantly, you're not willing to negotiate that anymore. And because of that, you start to let people go earlier. You stop trying to make puzzle pieces fit. You stop stretching yourself into versions that might be more likable. You stop editing your needs so you don't seem too much. You honor the people who showed up when you needed them, but you also honor the truth that some of them can't walk with you now. Not because they're bad, but because the version of you that once matched them no longer exists. And you mourn that, quietly, deeply, without bitterness. Because even in growth, there is grief. Grief for the people who stayed in one place while you evolved. Grief for the friendships that were everything at one point and nothing now. Grief for the comfort of old patterns, even when you know they were hurting you. You let yourself feel it, all of it, and you let it move through you like rain. You don't rush it, you don't numb it, you just allow it. And in the space that grief leaves behind, something beautiful blooms. Space. Space for your own voice. Space for new people. Space for opportunities you would have never had room for, while holding on to what was already gone. You start to notice the way your life rearranges itself when you get out of your own way. When you stop begging doors to reopen and start building your own. That doesn't mean it's easy. There are still days when the old version of you calls out. When you're tempted to reach out first, to over-explain, to go back to a situation that's familiar but not right. But now you catch yourself. You pause, you breathe. You say, we don't do that anymore. And you walk away, Not because you're heartless, but because you're healing. You begin to spend your time differently, with more intention. You guard your mornings, you protect your evenings, you stop committing to things just to fill your calendar. You ask yourself, does this align with who I'm becoming? Before saying yes. You say no more often, not with guilt, but with gratitude. Because every no is a yes to yourself, a yes to your rest, a yes to your peace, a yes to your priorities.